I grew up in a place where it rained almost every day, so the sound of raindrops hitting the roof had always been comforting to me. I even enjoyed driving at night during heavy rain. There was something about the empty roads and the streetlights reflecting off the wet pavement that gave me a strange sense of peace. After what happened 2 years ago, that feeling disappeared completely. I work maintaining ATMs. Sometimes that means driving for hours to small towns where almost nobody lives. The company assigns us different routes every week, and that night I had been sent to repair a broken ATM at a gas station in the middle of nowhere. It was late November. It had been raining since the afternoon, and by the time I finished the job, it was almost 11 at night. The gas station employee locked up while I was putting my tools away. "If you're taking the old highway, be careful," he said before pulling down the metal shutter. I asked him why. He simply replied, "When it rains this hard, people show up walking out there." I assumed it was just another local ghost story meant to scare outsiders. I laughed, said goodbye, and got back on the road. The rain got even worse about 10 minutes later. My windshield wipers were moving as fast as they could, but I could barely make out the white lines on the road. There were no other cars, no lights, no houses, just endless forest on both sides. Then I saw her, a woman. She was standing perfectly still on the shoulder of the road. She wasn't carrying an umbrella. She was wearing what looked like a soaked white nightgown. Her long hair covered most of her face. Instinctively, I slowed down. I thought she might be hurt or that she needed help. But something inside me told me to keep driving. I still can't explain what it was. It was just a horrible feeling in the pit of my stomach. As I drove past her, she slowly lifted her head. I couldn't make out her face clearly. The only thing I remember was her smile. It wasn't the smile of someone relieved to see another person. It was the smile of someone who knew something I didn't. I kept driving. I glanced into my rearview mirror. She was gone. I didn't see her walking away. I didn't see her step into the trees. She had simply disappeared. I convinced myself the rain had swallowed her up, making it impossible to see her through the storm. I turned the radio up to distract myself. About 5 minutes later, my phone rang. I didn't recognize the number. I answered using the hands-free system. At first, all I could hear was breathing, slow, steady, right next to the microphone. "Hello?" No answer, just breathing. Then a woman's voice whispered, "Why didn't you take me with you?" The call ended. Every hair on my body stood up. I immediately tried calling the number back. The number didn't exist. I told myself someone had to be playing a sick prank. Then I looked into the rearview mirror again. This time, someone was sitting in the back seat. I slammed on the brakes so hard the car nearly spun out. I turned around instantly. There was no one there. I switched on the interior light. I checked every seat. Nothing. I took several deep breaths, trying to convince myself I'd imagined it. That's when I noticed something. The back seat was soaking wet, as if someone had been sitting there for several minutes. Water was still dripping onto the floor of the car. There was no explanation for it. I started driving again. I just wanted to get off that road. I pressed harder on the accelerator. Then, without warning, the engine died. The headlights went out. Everything went black. The only sound left was the rain pounding against the roof. I tried starting the car again. Nothing. Again, nothing. As I reached for my flashlight, I heard 3 knocks. Knock, knock, knock. They came from the roof of the car. At first, I assumed a branch had fallen onto it. Then the knocks began moving. Slowly. From the roof, toward the windshield. As if someone was walking across the top of my car. I held my breath. The footsteps stopped directly above the driver's door, then silence. I have no idea how long I sat there. Maybe 30 seconds, maybe 2 minutes. Then someone knocked on the driver's side window just once. Slowly, I turned my head. It was the same woman. Her face was pressed against the glass. This time I could see her clearly. Her skin was unnaturally pale, her lips were blue, and she wore that same impossible smile. She wasn't speaking, she wasn't moving, she was just smiling, without taking her eyes off me. I reached for the passenger door, hoping to get out the other side. It wouldn't open. I tried the rear doors, locked. All 4 doors had locked themselves. I started pounding the steering wheel in panic. Then, without warning, the engine came back to life. The headlights flickered on. I looked back at the window. She was gone. I didn't waste another second. I slammed the car into gear and sped away, refusing to look in my mirrors. I didn't stop until I reached the main highway. By the time I got home, it was nearly 2 in the morning. I walked inside completely soaked. My wife asked why I looked so pale. I couldn't answer. All I wanted was to go to bed and convince myself it had all been some kind of nightmare. The next morning, I went down to the garage to clean out the car. The back seat was still wet. But that wasn't the worst part. On the fogged-up rear window, there was a message. It wasn't written with mud. It wasn't paint. Someone had traced it into the condensation with a finger. It read, "Next time, you won't leave alone." I sold that car a week later. I never drove down that road again, and every time I find myself driving through heavy rain, I do everything I can not to look into my rearview mirror. Because on some nights, I still think I can see someone smiling from the back seat. I'm a package delivery driver, and whenever it starts pouring, most people stay home. The roads are quieter, there's less traffic, and deliveries usually go by much faster. At least that's what I used to think. About 8 months ago, I picked up a night shift because the company was offering double pay during a severe storm. The forecast called for heavy rain until sunrise, but I really needed the money. My final delivery was scheduled for 11:47 p.m. The address immediately caught my attention. There was no street name, just a set of GPS coordinates and a note that read, "Leave the package at the front door. Do not knock. Do not wait for a response." I figured it was just another customer with unusual instructions. The GPS led me down a narrow road surrounded by dense woods. The rain was so heavy I could barely see beyond my headlights. After about 20 minutes, I arrived at a house completely isolated from everything else. No neighboring homes, no parked vehicles, just an old wooden house with a single light glowing from an upstairs window. I grabbed the package and ran through the rain to the front porch. The front door was slightly open, just enough to reveal a dark hallway inside. I remembered the instructions. I set the package on the porch. Then I pulled out my phone to take the required delivery photo. As I aimed the camera toward the doorway, I noticed someone standing at the end of the hallway. The figure was unusually tall, completely motionless. I couldn't make out a face. I could only tell that it was staring directly at me. I lowered my phone immediately, looked straight into the house. No one was there. I convinced myself it had been some strange reflection caused by the rain. Wanting to get out of there as quickly as possible, I snapped the photo and hurried back to my delivery van. Before driving away, I checked the picture so I could upload it to the app. The front door was still open. The package was exactly where I had left it. But the figure was there too, only now. It was much closer. It was no longer standing at the end of the hallway. It was right behind the doorway. A chill ran through my entire body. I looked back at the house. There was no one there, and I decided it wasn't worth thinking about. I put the van in gear and drove away. After only a few hundred yards, my phone buzzed. Delivery rejected. I frowned. It had to be some kind of system error. A few seconds later, another notification appeared. Return and complete the delivery correctly. I looked in my rearview mirror. The house was still visible through the rain. The upstairs light was still on. With a sigh, I turned the van around. When I pulled back into the driveway, the package was gone. But the front door was still standing open, exactly the way I had left it. I called the customer's number. No answer. I waited for a few seconds. Then I heard a voice coming from inside the house. Very quiet, as if someone were speaking from deep inside the darkness. "Could you bring it in here?" I immediately stepped backward. The instructions had specifically said not to enter the house. I turned around and started walking back toward my van. That's when the front door slammed shut. The sound echoed through the property. I broke into a run. By the time I climbed back into the driver's seat, I was completely soaked. I turned the key. Nothing. I tried again. Still nothing. Then the dashboard lights began flickering. The radio suddenly switched on by itself. Through the static, I heard the same voice. "You still haven't delivered my package." My heart dropped. I slowly looked toward the house. The front door was open again, but this time, there were people standing on the porch. None of them moved. They simply stood there in the pouring rain, watching me. I counted 6, then 7, then I couldn't tell anymore. Every one of them had their head tilted to one side as if they were listening to something. Then, all at once, they slowly raised their heads and looked directly at me. The engine roared to life on its own. I didn't hesitate. I slammed the van into gear and sped away, nearly sliding into the ditch. I drove for nearly 15 minutes without slowing down. When I finally got a cell signal again, I called my supervisor and explained everything that had happened. There was a long silence on the other end. Then she asked, "What was the address?" I gave it to her. I could hear her typing on her keyboard. A few moments later, she said, "That address was removed from our system 3 years ago." I frowned. "Then why did it show up as an active delivery?" Another pause. When she finally answered, every hair on my arm stood up. "Because that house burned down during a storm. Everyone who lived there died, including a delivery driver who disappeared the night of his last delivery." I quit my job the very next day. A few weeks ago, I was scrolling through old photos on my phone. I found the delivery picture from that night. Out of curiosity, I zoomed in. The figure behind the doorway was still there. But that wasn't the worst part. Reflected in the glass of the front door, someone was standing directly behind me, holding a package, wearing the exact same delivery uniform I had on that night. I don't make deliveries anymore, but every time it starts raining after dark, I can't help wondering whether that package is still waiting to be delivered. I've been a tow truck driver for over 10 years. I've worked overnight shifts, driven empty highways, and handled breakdowns in snow, dense fog, and heavy rain. After a while, you get used to desperate people and strange situations. But nothing compares to what happened that night. It was around 1 in the morning when dispatch sent me a roadside assistance request, a disabled vehicle. The location was a secondary highway cutting through a heavily wooded area nearly 40 minutes from the nearest town. As I drove toward the location, the rain was coming down so hard I could barely see more than a few feet ahead of me. There was no traffic, no lights, nothing except the endless sound of rain pounding against my windshield. When I reached the location, there was no vehicle. I figured the customer must have entered the wrong location. I called the phone number listed on the request. It was answered immediately. But nobody spoke. All I could hear was the sound of rain, the exact same rain falling around my tow truck. I hung up. A few seconds later, my phone rang again. The same number. This time a man's voice whispered, "You're here. Don't leave." The call ended. I slowly looked around. Nothing. I switched on my high beam, scanning both sides of the road. That's when I saw it, a black sedan parked about 100 yards ahead. I couldn't understand how I had missed it just moments earlier. I slowly pulled up beside it. The engine was off. The windows were completely fogged over. I knocked on the driver's window. No response. I tried the door handle. It was unlocked. There was no one inside. The keys were still in the ignition. The driver's seat was completely soaked, as if someone had been sitting there in the rain for hours. As I walked back toward my tow truck, I heard the sound of a car door closing behind me. I turned around. The sedan hadn't moved, but now its headlights were on. A knot formed in my stomach. I called the customer's number again. It was answered immediately. "Sir, where are you?" I asked. There was a long pause. Then the voice quietly replied, "I'm behind you." I spun around so fast I nearly slipped on the wet pavement. No one. Just the empty highway disappearing into the darkness. Then I heard a loud metallic clang. It came from the bed of my tow truck. I climbed up with my flashlight. Nothing. But the steel tow hook was still swaying back and forth, as if someone had just let go of it. At that exact moment, the sedan's headlights began flashing. Slowly, almost like they were trying to get my attention. Without really thinking, I pointed my flashlight toward the driver's side mirror. I saw a face. A man was sitting in the back seat, completely soaked. His head tilted slightly downward, smiling. I immediately aimed the flashlight through the window. The back seat was empty. I looked at the mirror again. He was still there, watching me. I slowly backed away without taking my eyes off the mirror. That's when I heard footsteps, not in front of me, behind me, very close. It sounded like someone was slowly walking through the water covering the road. Every time I turned around, there was no one there. But the footsteps never stopped. They always stayed behind me, never in front. I ran back to the cab of my tow truck, locked the doors, started the engine. It fired up immediately. Before pulling away, I glanced at my side mirror. There were footprints. Dozens of soaking wet footprints. They stretched from the woods, all the way to the driver's door of my truck. But something about them made my blood run cold. Every single footprint pointed toward my truck. Not one of them pointed away. I slammed the truck into gear and drove away without looking back. For the next several miles, I couldn't shake the feeling that another vehicle was following me. Every time I checked my mirrors, I saw two headlights in the distance. Whenever I slowed down, they slowed down too. When I finally reached a 24-hour gas station, I felt the first real sense of relief I'd had all night. I glanced into my mirror one last time. There was no car behind me. I went inside to grab a coffee and calm my nerves. As I waited at the register, the cashier looked at my uniform. "You coming from the Old Forest Highway?" he asked. I nodded. The expression on his face changed immediately. He told me that exactly 10 years earlier, on a stormy night just like this one, a tow truck driver had disappeared on that very road while responding to a roadside assistance call. They never found his truck. They never found him. A chill ran through my body. I told him everything that had just happened. He didn't say a word. Instead, he slowly pointed toward the large security mirror hanging behind the counter. "Don't move," he whispered. I looked into the mirror. I could see myself. I could see the cashier, but standing directly behind me was a man drenched in rain, wearing a tow truck driver's uniform, smiling. I spun around instantly. No one was there. I looked back at the mirror. He was still standing there, smiling. I stopped accepting overnight calls during storms after that, because there's one thing I've never been able to explain. Every time I drive in heavy rain and glance into my rearview mirror, for just a split second, I still see that same smiling man sitting silently in the seat behind me.